Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying there too. It's yeah, it like from a visibility standpoint, especially from maybe the local market when they see a partnership with a traditional news outlet or see a column or an article, to many that is like a sign of very high success. But when you're kind of in your own channel of what it is that you're trying to accomplish, it's more of just a, oh, that's great that we were able to share our content there, but we really have a focus and mission on what we're trying to do. That's a lot bigger than maybe just trying to have our content in the in a respectable traditional media company.
Yeah,
So yeah,
wait, I'm
that's
sorry. I think
yeah.
like
Please go
that
ahead.
answer was really long. I think I'll structure it better to understand your question properly. I mean, to answer your question properly. So I think when we look at like partnerships, right, we always look at it from the point of view that what would the people in the audience think about this partnership? Because it's easy to get carried away, as you said, with like brand names, brand recognition with different audiences. Like um, when we got invited to work with Manila Bulletin, the oldest newspaper in the Philippines, it was a big deal, especially for people in the Philippines. When my parents' friends heard about it, they were like really amazed.
Hmm.
Um, it's not like the newspaper is not big, it's huge, but for people in the startup ecosystem, the partnership is like, okay, great, as you said, but
Hmm.
like not something that people should just be like cheering on and on and on for. Like, I think being on TechCrunch as like a columnist, like invited on there is much more relevant. So I think
Hmm.
when you are evaluating partnerships, you have to think like, what is the value add that this partnership is going to give me, and what's the perception that my audience is going to have, like my main audience. Are they going to think I'm selling out just because they think that
Right.
this is just like blah? But for me, when I evaluated the partnership with Manila Bulletin, I decided to do it for a few reasons. So one, working with the oldest newspaper in the Philippines, I think gives the brand like BackScoop some credibility because a traditional media outlet, a very large one, recognizes the
Hmm.
content. The second reason is because it allowed us to do a regular column, long form, on print and digital. I think that would help us really practice writing long form content. We are very good at writing short content on the newsletter, but how can we try a longer medium? Try a different kind of writing, maybe a bit more serious, on somebody else's platform, which is a lot less risky than doing it on our own platform. And third, I
Hmm.
actually wanted to see what the kind of reception appetite would be like for people from, the general populace of the Philippines in the startup ecosystem. And lastly, I thought it was interesting because when you're trying to build a startup ecosystem, you can't only focus on the people only and like only within the ecosystem. You also have to nurture it. So I thought working with the Manila Bulletin would help us sort of nurture a bigger set of ecosystem in the Philippines in a sense. Like, sure,
Hmm.
I think there are probably going to be 100,000 people maybe holding the newspaper today. But if every weekend, every week, or every month that somebody reads our column, just one out of the every 1,000 or 2,000 people might be interested in the startup ecosystem after reading it, then I think it's a
Hmm.
good thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And you talked there about the local ecosystem, and um, I, I think one of the interesting uh, parts about BackScoop too is that you're not only local, you're regional. And so what would you say are the I guess some of the considerations that you have being a regional media company versus a local media company? What are
So,
some of the yeah? Sorry, go ahead.
go ahead. No, I think your
Oh,
question
that
had
was
some
it.
explanation. Okay, okay. So, like from day one, it was always regional, and the reason it was regional was because I felt like the problem was felt on um, a regional level impact. Yeah, the problem was felt on a regional level. Like the problem of people not being able to access startup news conveniently, easily on a regular basis was something everyone in Southeast Asia felt. And everyone is sort of looking at the same groups of content, the same platforms. because everybody from Singapore, Malaysia, Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia, everywhere else in Southeast Asia are also checking Dale Street Asia, Tech in Asia, um, E27, all these platforms. So you have to
Mhm.
know like sort of the audience or the kind of populace that is feeling your problem and like what are their similarities. If let's say we realize that everybody in Southeast Asia except for Thailand and Vietnam had this problem, then I don't think we would be like a regional media platform. I think we would just focus on those markets alone. But because we
Mhm.
felt like it was a semi homogenous problem across all these markets, then that's why it was regional. That's one um, way we look at it. The second reason it's regional is because if we just focused on one market like Philippines or one market like Vietnam, one market like Thailand, one market like Indonesia, I don't think we can guarantee to have like enough content for a week.
Mhm.
So it also depends on like the pace of content that you wanna like have. We wanted to publish minimum once a week and sort of ramp up publishing more days. So we felt like if we only focus on one market at a time, then we definitely won't be able to keep up to that pace. Maybe not even once a week, especially if it was like only Philippines or only Vietnam. And then the third was like sort of the foresight, right? We saw that in Southeast Asia, the ecosystem was really growing and it was growing as a whole. So there was some sort of regional unity. It's not like that this, again, was not something that was a trend only happening in certain markets in Southeast Asia. This growth in the set of ecosystems is happening everywhere.
Mhm.
And since we knew that that growth was happening everywhere, then all the more the problem was aggravated for everyone. So that's why we're a regional platform, not a local one.
Mhm.
Because I don't think BackScoop would have worked if it just focused on one market or two markets. And it doesn't make sense to half Southeast Asia or to splice it like into bits.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I like the I like on your last point there. That's the North Star of the company, and underneath that is the pace of content release. That's such an interesting challenge that I know Max and I at Rising Giants we always discuss or face and think about, depending on whether that's through social media, whether that's through our in terms of short form content, if that's in terms of podcast releases. The pace can really dictate uh, a lot of the velocity in which your business can grow too. For us, we've started shifting to trying to release a podcast at least once a week as we've grown into new markets such as Thailand and other and Singapore. So for us, we've it a lot of that adjustment of change of pace and speeding up means that there's more work on the table, and in that sense it's about building a great team around you that can help support and be part of that journey with you. So what's it been like growing the team at BackScoop? Who are the kind of people that you're looking to join the business?
I think what people were really surprised about is that I didn't make any hires or even bring on any like interns until BackScoop like early 2023. So I started BackScoop August 2021. So I didn't have like any other team members for like a year and a half. So at that point, I was writing the newsletter 4 times a week and I had just like started my podcast. So I also don't know how I did it back then, but I think there was a good, like looking back, it was good that I didn't bring on anyone so early. I think there are a lot of people who are telling me, like, oh, you should learn to delegate already. You should learn to hire people already. But I think being able to understand the kind of work on my plate and like for the whole company and have done it myself was like going to make it a lot easier for me to bring on new hires and onboard them. Because, for example, with me, right, let's be honest, like writing a newsletter 4 times a week is really, really tiring. But because I
Yeah.
did it 4 times a week, plus the podcast, plus everything else in the company, I was like, oh, somebody can actually survive doing this. Like it's possible. So now it's really easy for me to tell people, like, look, if you want to be a writer, This is not going to be an easy job, but it is actually possible to write a newsletter 4 times a week. It's possible to find a new story every single day. And it's possible to turn every story into an interesting story. And I think being able to communicate that and do that confidently, because I did that, is really helpful. It also helps me, like, when I say that, then I can also weed out the people who wouldn't want that kind of job or think that they cannot do it. And that also allows me to, like, sort of easily manage people a lot better. So, for example, when we have a writer, then I can tell them, like, oh, what are you having a hard time with? Is it the pace? Is it the style of writing? And then when they share their problems with me, because I had the same problem when I was writing it 4 times a week, then I can help, firefight their problems. So
Mhm.
having done everything myself before and, like, gone to the point where I was, like, literally, like, breaking with all of, like, the workload, at least it helps me, like, when I have to onboard people and tell them, like, okay, this is what you do, these are the problems, this is what you might face. And also, like, foresee the issues. Like, I can look at, like, the news today and say, like, okay, it's 3 p.m., there's no news. This is the this means that you have to look at the stories from this lens, or look at this, or do this. Like, I already know, like, how to work around some of the problems. And I think, like, having gone through, like, the tough parts of the job, right? You also have more empathy for people who are doing the job, versus, like, if I just delegated early, then I might not understand, like, why is this writer having a hard time writing 4 times a week? Like, I might not ever realize how hard it is if I've never done it. As for the kinds of people that we want to bring on, right? At the end of the day, it's a media company. We're also trying to be fun. We're trying to write content that is relatable for people in the startup ecosystem. So one, you need to be fun, and two, you have to be really interested in Southeast Asian startups.
Mhm.
And those are two of the main criteria we have. Like, it sounds so vague, fun, and interested in Southeast Asian startups, but we have our own ways of, like, qualifying it. Personally, I like people I can work with, that I can talk to. So if I had to stay with you every single day for a week and hang out with you, I better survive. Like, I don't want to work with someone that I can't survive hanging out with for a week with no work,
Yeah.
because it's not going to be fun to work with you, and it's not going to be fun to work with me either. I think the work will just be really, like, tiring and not feel as meaningful if you don't feel like you have a bond with the people around you, and you don't feel like you have a fun time with the people around you. And if you're not a fun person, you can't write fun content and think of funny titles like we do. Apart from that, I also like working with people who have their own interests. So have, like, having deep interests in a hobby or a topic or something is something that I see as a very good trait among the hires that we've had. So it usually shows that the person's self-motivated, the kind of values that they have, and their reasons for doing things. So when I interview people, I try to ask about their hobbies, their interests, if there's been anything that's ever captivated them or made them really obsessed with something, because I think it's really nice to see someone who truly genuinely likes something so much that they've been obsessed with it, not to, like, a creepy degree, but to, like, an inspiring degree. Like, I want to work with people who, like, inspire me in some sense, because how many times do you meet somebody, like, in a coffee shop or just, like, once in your day, and then you hear them talk about something they're really into, and then they know so much about it, they're really good at it, to the point that you're like, wow, I'm not interested in that, but, like, I respect you and you're really cool. Like, that's the kind of person I would like to work with, even if they're older than me or younger than me or whatever.
Maybe that's actually a good segue into podcasting. What is that?
Mm.
Sorry, what has that experience been like for you? Just beginning a podcast, starting the podcast in 2023. What have you what have been sort of some of the lessons along the way on the podcasting side of things?
I think everyone has a story, right? Like, everyone that I brought onto the podcast, sure, I've looked some up. Some people, like, all I know is, like, the company and the title, but I've never looked into their backstory. But somehow, every time we bring someone on the podcast, they've all got an interesting story to tell. And I think it's really about being able to be someone that they can share it with. So I think that's also helped me from, like a life, like, in terms of, like, my personal life, or, like, outside of work, like, having the perspective that everybody has a story to tell and everyone could be interesting if you give them the floor to do so. So how can you be that kind of person that people can be comfortable being around and speaking with? I think that's one way that sort of podcasting influenced me. And two, like podcasting is really hard. I mean, I tried recording 2 episodes in one day and I was absolutely beat by like midway into the second podcast. So you learn some things about yourself too. Third is like, it's easier to figure out like the kind of people you vibe with or not. I mean, that's the funny thing. Everyone is interesting, but then you also figure out what are your kinds of interesting, right? You'll find out which stories speak to you, the way you make like conversations flow, the direction of topics. You'll find that some people really like talking about their jobs. Some people really like talking about their kids. Some people really like talking about not their job and not their kid. Um, and it's up to you to decide like, oh, where do you want to direct the conversation, and that you can actually direct the conversation if you have the skill to do so. So it's a really transformative experience, I guess, like podcasting. And then lastly, I think it's also good on the personal side because you get to also introspect along the way. You learn some things for yourself, for your personal life, like life lessons. You learn some things for your own company. And lastly, you also learn some things about yourself because sometimes like you end the episode and you're like, oh, I didn't think I could think of that question, or I didn't think that you could do this or do that, when you're only able to think about that idea because you spoke to someone on the podcast.
Yeah, I actually, well, definitely Dom and I resonate with what you were saying about like how much energy they take out of you. We've just been going through like a podcast sprint for the last month, so I think we've done 10 in this month, and it definitely does get to you because you want to be able to show up right for every single one with
Yeah.
as much energy and respect for the
Yeah.
guests as possible.
Yeah, I think one of the things I learned from my podcast is that sometimes my face really hurts after one episode because sometimes some guests are really funny. But sometimes there's some guests that make you like smile a lot, and then like after it's like my face, it hurts.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you had any like have you had any? I mean, it's just like a random like tangent of a question. But do you ever like have a podcast where you're like, oh, I wish, like you then decide that you actually won't release it, or is it always you always go for it, like whenever you've invited someone, or would you do like a redo, for example?
I think there was one guest before, and I felt like that day I was really tired, and then I don't think I was able to bring enough out of the story. I think the person had an interesting story, but I don't know if it was because I wasn't able to bring it up, or maybe the person hasn't really talked about it before. So I felt like in that episode, it wasn't really communicated that well. It wasn't as interesting, and I felt like, oh gosh, I didn't do it justice. But no, I didn't end up doing a redo for that episode.
Okay. And maybe just looking out onto 2024, 2025, what are your kind of goals and vision for the next few years for what you want BackScoop to become?
I think the ideal way I would think of BackScoop is this. Like, I would be happy if this is what happened. Like, somebody wakes up in the morning and then they read the newsletter to start their day. And then on the way to work, they're listening to the podcast during their commute or during their drive. And then when they get to work, maybe they need to hire somebody, or they need to find like a company they need to partner with, or um, a new investor. Then they would use BackScoop as a resource to do so. And then maybe sometime in the day they need some more in-depth information about some startups, some industry, they'd also look back at us. And then maybe they need some kind of startup related service, they'd go back to us as well. And then maybe to end their day, they're going to an event run by us. So I think like that would be the ideal scenario. How can we be the go-to platform, the go-to brand for anybody in Southeast Asian startups, for them to do absolutely anything, like whether it's like directly work related, like as I said, finding a job, finding an investor, finding a partner, getting the news done. Getting to read the news and getting to learn about an interesting founder, up until like using BackScoop as a way to find other interesting people in their space to be friends with. Maybe they just moved to the country and they need to, grow their network, so they go to one of our events. So I think that's really what would make me happy. as a baseline. And what would make me even happier is if we were even able to, expand beyond Southeast Asian tech, and people would be going to our content, going through our products and services to find more information or get other things done even outside of tech. So that's really what we're working towards. I think having done this for almost 3 years, I think the first 2 years we're really trying to prove to people that, like, hey, we can come out of nowhere, like absolutely nowhere. I had practically zero background in tech apart from that 1 year working at a startup, and show people that we could become a go-to platform for Southeast Asian tech. Sure, maybe we're not like the number one platform yet, but like, how do we get our foot in the door, show that we have permission to play in the market and be one of the top like players? And then next few years is really about, how can we become the number one player? Then after that is, how can we really become like a media company on the Southeast Asian front beyond just Southeast Asian tech? And then, like, outside of the business sense, right? I would just be happy to see us be able to bring value into people's lives professionally, personally, through the different content and products and services that we have. I have yet to see somebody reading BackScoop in public, like without knowing them, but that would be a pretty fun time. I hope that happens this year.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's great. I like the whole like analogy of like someone's day and how they could be using and listening and reading. So because you're able
Mhm.
to cover all of those
Yeah.
areas. And just as we move into like the last section of the podcast, we wanted to just touch on like a few kind of interpersonal areas. So,
Mhm.
what are some of your key habits that you kind of that you that you do on a daily or a weekly basis that you think have had the most impact on your overall goals in life?
I think like what really helped me, I don't think this is a habit, but just like a personal disposition. I think generally being like a positive, happy person helps you a lot. Um, like, don't feel like other people are gonna take away stuff from you. Like, don't have that scarcity mindset. Try to see the best in other people. Like, don't be naive, but try to like be positive, have a good outlook on life. Try to look at people from a positive light. I think it really helps you a lot, because when you're bogged down thinking about lots of negative things, if you're the kind of person where you think life sucks, and then every time something bad happens to you, it just proves to you like, oh, life sucks. It's another bad person. It's another bad thing. I think it can really make you really worn down in the journey. But for example, I think I'm the kind of person that, something bad happens, I'll be like, oh, okay, that happened. And then I just move on. Yeah, sometimes I feel hurt, right? But I think at the end of the day, I tried to be like a more positive person, and it's helped a lot in everything. It also attracts a lot of better people into your life. So I think generally, like, trying to I've been posting on LinkedIn since late 2021, and most of my content is very positive, very happy, trying to be um, like, how can I create content that makes people like feel inspired, smile, not something where you're complaining or stuff like that, or trying to be like, do not do this, like, kind of content. Having positive content actually brings a lot of really good people your way too. So internally, the disposition for yourself, being positive, and externally, can you bring out positive things in other people's lives, like through a post or through your interactions with them? I think helps you not get worn out across the journey. Then other key habits, I think I've changed these on and off. I think in the first like 1 to 2 years, when you're really like gritting it out, maxing out your hours, I think a key habit I have, and something I really was good at since I was in school, was like, I'm really good at sitting down and being focused and not being able to like get out of like my seat. I'm really good at getting absorbed and stuff. So that was really good for me in the first 1 to 2 months. 1 to 2 years, I got a lot done, but you can't do that forever. So I think within the 2 year mark, I felt like, okay, I can't do this anymore. Like, that laser focus is actually tiring to do for an extended period of time. So one, the laser focus helps in the first 1 to 2 years when you're doing everything, but two, know when you have to get out of it. And then the last like key habit that has been like kind of helpful for me lately, especially as like the business has evolved, I have had to evolve, has been like trying to step outside of work and do other things too. So lately, I've been trying to go to the gym, which I haven't done this week, but I will. But I noticed that having those like walks or going to the gym or just having like time when you're not using your phone, checking your email or at the office or thinking about work, like doing something that doesn't force you to think about work, really zips it out of your mind. It's really helpful. So yeah, I think those are like the key habits or the key things that help me a lot.
Great. And our last question that we like to ask all of our guests is, what is the most important piece of advice that you've ever been given?
Most important advice that I've ever been given. I think somebody gave me this piece of advice really, really early on in my like career before I started BackScoop, and that was like, how do you turn the worst things that happen to you into the best things that happen to you? So having that kind of mindset always reminds me that like, how even though there like might be a bad situation in your life or at work, you can always like turn things around and that you have the agency to do so. So I think that's a really good quote.
Great. Yeah. On that note, we really want to thank you for coming on Rising Giants today. We learned a lot, and as fellow founders in the media space, it's great to learn more from what you're doing, and we really admire and respect everything that you're working on to bring about more awareness for Southeast Asia tech.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Max and Dom. Thank you for the questions that you asked. I really enjoyed answering them. And it's really nice speaking with you guys today, too.